So right now, when the Chinese subs and their surface ships are leaving the Chinese ports in South China Sea or East China Sea, they have to go through these choke points in the first island chain, between Taiwan and the Philippines or between Taiwan and Japan. Very, very shallow choke points can be fully controlled by U.S. allies and U.S. Navy, and that limits your ability to project power. If you take Taiwan and you build military bases on that deep side of Taiwan, then you and you build missile bases, etc., then you threaten the U.S. naval forces in Japan and U.S. Marines there, U.S. forces in the Philippines. You really make it unsustainable for us to operate there in the event of conflict. You push us all the way back to Hawaii, and you dominate that region. It doesn't mean that they're going to go on a Hitlerian invasion spree and take Japan or Philippines or whatever, but they don't need to bully them around and to threaten them, just like Russia threatens its neighbors, right? Much of Central Asia is within Russia's sphere of influence, for example, not because they're invading them, but because they know that they don't have a choice. America's far away, can't help them. China doesn't seem interested either. And when Russia says jump, they have to say how high. And that will be Japan, that will be Korea, that will be Philippines. That will be one of the most important regions of the world where you have about half of the world's GDP, most of the supply chains, most of the economic growth. If China dominates that region and sets the rule of trade and security, that will be a diminishment of U.S. economic power, for U.S. national security, and will be a more powerful China that is now uncorked. And it will not stop, of course, at East Asia, but uses a platform to project power across the world, in Latin America, in our own neighborhood, in Europe, and et cetera. And it'll be a decline of U.S. power. It'll be a rise of Chinese power. And traditionally, when that's happened, whether it's Germany or Japan in the 1940s or 1914, you inevitably have conflict, right? And a more powerful China is a much dire threat to the United States from a conflict perspective over time as well. So Taiwan is really that key battleground that if you deter them ideally from taking it, then you can keep them contained and you allow their economy to stagnate on its own. They've already hit middle income trap. Their growth rates are about the same as ours, 3-4%. Their economy is 25% smaller. So at that rate, they will never catch up with us. Contained geographically, the decoupling that's occurring, at least partial decoupling, and the demographics collapse that they are going to go through in the rest of the century, that is just absolutely staggering, right? They have about 1.4 billion people today. Conservative projections are that they'll have about 550 million by the end of the century, and much of that will be older population, right? So not a great trajectory at all. If you can keep them contained, if you can keep them from dominating East Asia and expanding their resources, economic resources, by setting the rules of trade in that region. And that's how you ultimately win the Cold War.
If they do invade Taiwan, do you think it would kick off World War III?
Well, it would kick off potentially, if the U.S. chooses to fight, for all the reasons I mentioned that I think are important to us, a very dangerous conflict, one that we have not seen really since World War II, potentially even World War I or Civil War. The estimates on the casualties we would sustain, thousands of American troops, within days, could eclipse anything that we saw in a single day of combat in World War II. We lost about 2,000 Americans, 2,500, I think, on D-Day, the deadliest conflict day of the conflict for us during World War II. If one aircraft carrier is sunk, that's 5,000 Americans that will be dead instantly, right? So really, really dramatic stakes, not to mention that China is a nuclear power. And in any conflict with China, there'll be a discussion, at least, because the military will really want to strike Chinese air bases to prevent the threat of Chinese fighter jets and bombers from targeting our naval assets. And if you strike mainland China, well, guess what? They're going to try to strike us, our mainland. And you could have missiles, hopefully conventional missiles, flying into our ports or air bases across the United States, certainly the Western Pacific. And who knows where it goes from there. Very, very dangerous. So I don't know if it's a World War III, because I don't think that it'll play out in any part of the world. I don't think we'll be fighting China in Europe or Africa or whatever. They don't have that power projection capability, but it's going to be incredibly dangerous in East Asia. And it could spur adventurism by others. The North Koreans may decide that this is an optimal time to do something on the Korean Peninsula. Iranians may do something in the Middle East, Russia and Europe. So that is the risk.